अब हम बात करेंगे आज अबाउट द ड्राफ्टिंग ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन। ठीक है, लास्ट टाइम आई टोल्ड यू अबाउट द कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली। मैंने आपको बताया था द कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली वाज द कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट बॉडी विच हैड द सोल पर्पस ऑफ मेकिंग कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन, और उसके बाद इसकी और भी कुछ फंक्शंस थी। तो मैं आपको ये बता दूं दैट फॉर द फॉर्मेशन और फॉर द राइटिंग ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली मेट ऑन 11 सेशंस। सो कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली कितने सेशंस में मिली? इट मेट ऑन 11 सेशंस ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ 2 years 11 months and 18 days, that is around 3 years। ठीक है, सो कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली को कितना टाइम लग गया? 3 साल लग गए। इट मेट ऑन 11 सेशंस। ठीक है, एंड इट वेंट थ्रू द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशंस ऑफ वेरियस कंट्रीज। इट इज रिटन समवेयर दैट इट वेंट थ्रू द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशंस ऑफ 60 कंट्रीज। ठीक है, बहुत काम किया है द कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली ने, बहुत काम किया है। एंड फाइनली द ड्राफ्ट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन वाज formed, and the draft constitution itself, it was considered for around 114 days, and it took around 64 lakhs of rupees for the constitution of this constitution। तो ये फैक्ट्स आप छोड़ेंगे, कम से कम आप इतना याद रखेंगे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बनाने में हमें 3 साल लग गए। एंड वी read and we went through and we did the research of constitutions of almost 60 countries of the world। ठीक है, so the final session of the Constituent Assembly, the first session that started on the 9th December 1946, and the final session that started on the 24th Jan 1950, it was the last session of the Constituent Assembly of India। ठीक है, it was the final session of the Constituent Assembly of India। So after this session, the Constituent Assembly, its role as the constituent body ended। ठीक है, इसका रोल एज कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट बॉडी वो खत्म हो गया, एंड इट एक्टेड ओनली एज अ लेजिस्लेटिव बॉडी। वो मैंने ऑलरेडी आपको बता दिया है। ठीक है, सो द कॉन्स्टिट्यूंट असेंबली इट फॉर्म्ड द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन थ्रू वेरियस कमिटीज। तो इसमें बहुत सारी कमिटीज थी। सम ऑफ द कमिटीज वायर द मेजर कमिटीज एंड सम ऑफ द कमिटीज वायर द माइनर कमिटीज। सो हम ज्यादा डेप्थ में नहीं जाएंगे, कम से कम आप कुछ मेजर कमिटीज के नाम याद रखेंगे। ठीक है, तो मैं कुछ मेजर कमिटीज के नाम आपको बताऊंगा। ठीक है, नंबर 1, देयर वाज अ कमिटी हुज नेम वाज द यूनियन पावर्स कमिटी। Union Powers Committee, and then there was a second committee which was known as a Union Constitution Committee। Union Constitution Committee। So both the Union Powers Committee and the Union Constitution Committee, they had the same chairman। ठीक है, इनका चेयरमैन एक ही था, he was जवाहरलाल नेहरू। ठीक है, ये आप याद रखेंगे। So the major committees include the Union Powers Committee and the Union Constitution Committee, and both these committees, they were headed or they were chaired by Jawaharlal Nehru। ठीक है, उसके बाद we had a committee which is known as the Provincial Constitution Committee। ठीक है, the Provincial Constitution Committee, it was headed by सरदार वल्लभ भाई पटेल। ये आपको याद रखना है, दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। ठीक है, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, he headed the Provincial Constitution Committee। Sardar Patel। ठीक है, we had a drafting committee। ये वैसे आप सबको पता ही होगा। The drafting committee of the Constitution, it was headed by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar। ये वैसे आप सबको पता ही होगा। ठीक है, और इसके अलावा we had rules of procedure committee, and we had a steering committee। Both were headed by Rajendra Prasad। Right, and we had a committee which was known as the States Committee। It was also headed by Jawaharlal Nehru, and we had an advisory committee on fundamental rights and minorities which was headed by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. So we had a committee which was known as the Advisory Committee on the Fundamental Rights and Minorities, and it was headed by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. So these were 8 major committees of the Constituent Assembly of India. कम से कम आप याद रखेंगे. They had the Union Powers Committee, the Union Constitution Committee and the States Committee. All the 3 committees they were headed by Jawaharlal Nehru. ठीक है. These 2 and this. उसके बाद 2 committees they were headed by Rajendra Prasad. Rules of Procedure Committee and Steering Committee they were headed by Rajendra Prasad. And 2 committees they were headed by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. ठीक है. Number 1, the Provincial Constitution Committee and the Advisory Committee on Fundamental Rights and Minorities. They were chaired by the Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. इसके अलावा there were certain minor committees, तो हम उस डिटेल में नहीं जाएंगे. मैं आपको ये बता दूं that the Constitution it was drafted by the Drafting Committee of the Constitution which was headed by the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. ठीक है. तो ड्राफ्टिंग कमेटी में आपको ये याद रखना है, द ड्राफ्टिंग कमेटी इट वाज सेट अप ऑन 29 अगस्त 1947. ठीक है. 27 अगस्त 1947 ये डेट आप याद रखेंगे. सो द ड्राफ्टिंग कमेटी फॉर द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन of the Constituent Assembly for the drafting of the Constitution of India, it was set up on 29th August. Sorry, it's not 27th August, it's 29th August actually. 29th August 1947 and it was headed by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. ये आपको याद रखना. He was the chairman of the drafting committee and it included other members like Gopala Swamy, A.K. Iyer, K.M. Munshi and Sayyid Muhammad Sadullah, etc. ठीक है. The drafting committee it published its draft, the first draft that was published in February 1948 and then again in October 1948 and then the final draft it was read once and then second time and then third time. So Dr. B.R. Ambedkar it introduced the final draft of the Constitution of India in the Constituent Assembly in November 1948. So November 1948 में हमारा final draft तैयार था तकरीबन on 4th November 1948 हमारा जो फाइनल ड्राफ्ट था वो रेडी था एंड इट वाज इंट्रोड्यूस्ड बाय डॉक्टर बी आर अम्बेडकर. और जो है हमारा फाइनल ड्राफ्ट था इसमें फर्स्ट रीडिंग हुई, फिर सेकंड रीडिंग हुई और फिर फाइनल रीडिंग हुई एंड फाइनली इट वाज पास्ड ऑन 26 नवंबर 1949. ये आपको याद रखना है. यू हैव टू रिमेंबर दिस डेट. सो द फाइनल ड्राफ्ट ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन ड्राफ्टेड बाय द कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली, ड्राफ्टेड बाय द Draft Committee of the Constituent Assembly. The final draft it was finally passed on 26th of November 1949 in the Constituent Assembly and it received the signatures of 284 members of the Constituent Assembly. ये आपको याद रखना है. And this date, that is 26th November 1949, has been mentioned in the preamble to the Constitution of India. ठीक है. ये आपको याद रखना है. The Constitution was adopted. So the Constitution as adopted on 26th November 1949 contained a preamble. It contained 395 articles and 8 schedules. ये आपको याद रखना है. So there were 395 articles. There were 8 schedules. ठीक है. And there was a preamble in the Constitution that was adopted on 26th November 1949. ठीक है. So, I told you that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he was the chairman of the drafting committee. So, he is also known as the father of Constitution of India. And sometimes he is also known as the chief architect of the Constitution of India. And sometimes he is also known as the modern Manu. इस पे questions आते हैं. ठीक है. तो मैंने ये बताया that on 26 November 1949, our Constitution had the preamble, 395 articles and 8 schedules and the preamble of the Constitution of India it was passed or enacted after the entire Constitution of India was enacted. ये आप याद रखेंगे. ठीक है. अब मैं आपको बताऊंगा about the enforcement of the Constitution. This is very important. So जो हमारा Constitution, the Constitution of India, some of the provisions of the Constitution of India pertaining to the citizenship, the elections, etc. क्योंकि we had to decide about the citizenship, about the elections which we were to do in future, citizenship elections, about the provisional parliament, about the temporary and the transitional provisions. उनके बारे में और कुछ short titles, कुछ articles के जो थे, they came into force on the same date, 26th November 1949. So some of the provisions of the constitution, like the citizenship, like the elections, like the provisions related to the provisional parliament, about the temporary and the transitional provisions, they came into effect on 26 November 1949 itself. But the major portion of the constitution, the remaining portion or the major portion of the constitution of India, that came into force on 26 January 1950. ये आपको याद रखना है. You must remember this date. अगर आपसे एग्जाम में पूछा जाए, the constitution came, the provisions of the constitution came into force on, आप ये लिखेंगे 26 January 1950, because most of the provisions of the constitution, the major portion of the constitution came into force on 26 January 1950 and not on 26 November. 26 November पे कुछ provisions force में आ गए. So this date 26 January 1950, this date in constitution is referred as the date of its commencement and is celebrated as the Republic Day. So the date of commencement of the Constitution of India is 26th January 1950, and this date is celebrated as the Republic Day of India. Republic क्या होता है वो मैं बाद में बताऊंगा, ठीक है. It is celebrated as the Republic Day of India, ठीक है. Why 26th January 1950 is celebrated as the Republic Day of India? कभी आपसे कोई पूछे, आप उसको ये जवाब देंगे that on this date, that is on 26th January 1950, 1950 याद नहीं रखेंगे आप, 26 जनवरी आप याद रखेंगे. 26 जनवरी हमने चूज क्यों किया था? बिकॉज ऑन 26 जनवरी in 1930 we had celebrated the Purna Swaraj Day. What is Purna Swaraj? Complete independence. क्या हुआ था इन द December session of 1929, December session of 1929 जो कि लाहौर में हुआ था, जिसको हम लाहौर सेशन भी बोलते हैं, ऑफ इंडियन नेशनल कांग्रेस. हमने एक रेजोल्यूशन पास किया था. In this resolution of December 1929 in Lahore session, we passed a resolution that we will celebrate 26 January 1930 as the Purna Swaraj Day. So to commemorate this day, we celebrate 26th day of 1950 as the date of commencement of the constitution, and we specifically chose this date. ठीक है. और मैं आपको ये भी बता दूं that क्योंकि हमारे जब कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन फोर्स में आ गया, इस वजह से जो हमारे पुराने सारे एक्ट्स थे, they were repealed. So all the acts were repealed because they were made by the British Parliament. ठीक है. But one act that is known as the abolition of Privy Council Jurisdiction Act of 1949. The abolition of Privy Council Jurisdiction Act of 1949, it was not abolished. ये आपको याद रखना है. This act continued. Why? Because this act was made by the Constituent Assembly itself. Why? Because the Constituent Assembly itself was a legislative body. क्योंकि मैंने बोला कि 1947 के बाद it acted as a legislative body and it had the power to make laws. So it made this law. Abolition of Privy Council Jurisdiction Act. So when the Constitution of India जब ये force में आ गया, तो it abolished it repealed all the acts made by the British Parliament on India. लेकिन क्योंकि act हमने खुद बनाया था, this act was made to continue. ठीक है. So there are certain people who criticize the Constituent Assembly on certain things, like that the Constituent Assembly, it was not a representative body. Some say that the Constituent Assembly, it was not a sovereign body, and some say that the Constituent Assembly took a long time for the preparation of the Constitution, and some say that the Constituent Assembly was dominated by Congress and it was a lawyer politician dominant body. ठीक है. And some say that the Constituent Assembly was dominated by Hindus. So we will not go into the depths of these criticisms. हमारा जो मकसद था, that was about the फॉर्मेशन आपके सिलेबस में दिया गया है, पंचायत अकाउंट्स असिस्टेंट सिलेबस में दिया गया है फॉर्मेशन ऑफ द कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली, तो हमने उतना कवर कर लिया. सो द फॉर्मेशन ऑफ कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली में मैंने बोला दैट द कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट असेंबली ये कैसे वजूद में आ गई. मैंने पहले जिक्र किया अबाउट द कैबिनेट मिशन प्लान दैट केम टू इंडिया. कैबिनेट मिशन प्लान अराइव्ड इन इंडिया इन मार्च अराउंड 24 मार्च 1946. द कैबिनेट मिशन प्लान जो इंडिया में आया, इसके 3 मेंबर्स थे. वन वाज लॉर्ड पैथिक लॉरेंस, दूसरा था सर स्टैफोर्ड क्रिप्स एंड द थर्ड वन वाज A.V. Alexander. So these three members of the cabinet mission, they arrived in India in 1946 and they gave a scheme, cabinet mission plan, and under this scheme they suggested how we can make the constituent assembly. तो हमने अपनी constituent assembly बनाई. फिर constituent assembly में हमने बहुत सारी कमिटीज बनाई. बहुत सारी कमिटीज में एक कमिटी थी ड्राफ्टिंग कमिटी. फिर हमने ड्राफ्ट किया एक कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन. फिर हमने कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बनाया एंड द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन came into force fully on, and the date of commencement of the constitution is 26 January 1950, and this day is celebrated as the Republic Day of India. So it is all about the formation of the Constitution of India. Thank you so much for watching. I will be back with other lecture on the fundamental rights, and then we will deal with the directive principles.